Still scared witless and horrified by these multiplying and changing creatures, Talion took off again, running away, as this horde of tiny skeletal monstrosities gave chase, beginning to leap around in every direction, swarming as if they were bees, beginning to fill the trees, cover the ground. They were everywhere, and as fast as he ran, they just kept following. As he dashed through the woods, one after another would lunge at him, grasping onto him with those tiny, bony little fingers, and then trying to sink their teeth in. He began having to rip them off one after another as they tried to bite into him. The bites were painful, but he really didn't have time to worry about it. His heart was pounding out of his chest, trying to think how to get away from them. One grasped onto his shoulder. He reached back, pulling it off just as it bit into him, slamming it down on the ground in front of him and stepping on it as he passed, the small creature dissipating into a cloud of black dust, like smoke. And that's when it occurred to him. If he could kill them, destroy them, then he wouldn't have to run from them anymore. It didn't look like they came back after he crushed them. The woods around here are thick. Fire doesn't hurt me. It could work, he thought. All at once he stopped his sprint, turning around, digging his heels into the dirt, grinding to a quick stop, and taking the biggest breath that he could, looking back at the swarm of entities approaching him, scattered out everywhere. With all his might he exhaled, breathing a stream of fire that filled the air. Talion began to look all around, spewing that gout of fire throughout the woods, catching the trees in the forest on fire. The small skeletal entities caught directly in the blast immediately burnt away, leaving nothing behind. As Talion breathed fire onto the trees and grass, ground around him, trying to spread it as wide as he possibly could, breathing fire all around him. Many of the other small creatures began to catch fire themselves from leaping onto trees that were in flames. Quickly, their numbers started to dwindle. The few that remained leaped through the fire, still trying to clasp onto Talion and bite into him. One after another, he started swinging hits at them, striking them to the ground or into trees, stomping on them where he could. One came directly at him. He managed to catch the small creature in his grasp, holding it tight in his hands, one holding onto the lower end of its body, the other onto the upper half. He squeezed with everything he was worth and felt the bones shatter in his hands as the small skeletal creature turned into that black smoke and drifted away. After a minute or two, it seemed like he had gotten all of them. He breathed sporadically as he tried to gauge his surroundings, looking around, trying to see if any more of them were going to jump out. At this point, the forest was on fire. Most of everything around him was, but the heat didn't bother Talion. In fact, it was almost sort of comforting to him. After a few moments of looking around, it looked like the coast was clear. All of the small skeletal entities had finally been done away with. For the time being, he was safe. His mother might kill him for setting the woods on fire, but at least he wasn't being eaten by small ravenous skeleton monsters. And then Talon began to hear an interesting sound, a sizzling of sorts, like the sound that you would hear if you poured water onto a fire. As he looked around, he began to see the mist and fog that was filling the area, beginning to cling to the trees, producing water. As he felt himself, he could even feel his own clothes starting to go incredibly damp, water starting to drip from his fingertips. As he looked around, he could see the fire in the forest starting to die down. Apparently, this mist was starting to put out the fire, but he had never known fog to accumulate moisture like this. It was way beyond what was normal. But after a short time, almost all the fire had been dissipated. only a few smoldering bits remaining as the fog in the area simply grew ever thicker. But finally, it seemed he was safe. "Talion," he heard, a very familiar voice, his mother's voice. He turned around to see his mother approaching him through the fog. "Talion, my son," she said as she stumbled in his direction. It looked as if she was injured, having very large wounds, looking like she had been cut by a sword. Many times, she was bleeding into her clothing. "Mom?" he shouted, running in her direction, terrified that something might have happened to her. As he approached, he nearly collapsed into his arms. "Oh, I'm so glad you're okay. You're not injured, are you?" "No, Mom, I'm okay. What happened? Who did this to you?" "They found us, Talion. The demons. They found us. I don't know where my mother is. The last I saw, she was still trying to fight them off. She led them away from me for the time being. Where is your teacher? We have to get out of here, now." I don't know," Talion said, terrified. Of all times they picked now to show up. Why? "So, you're here alone? Your teacher isn't with you?" "No, I don't know where he is. I think he's somewhere out here. I mean, he's the one creating this fog. But I don't know where he is." "Well, it's good then. You're alone. That means no one can interrupt us." "Mom, what are you talking about?" Talion replied. "If this must be done, then I should be the one who has to do it. I am your mother, after all," Melody said as she began to stand back to her feet, reaching behind her and pulling out the small blade. "Asgar," she said as the green glowing blade emerged. "What's going on, Mom? Is there someone out here?" Talion said as he began to look around, searching for an enemy. And in that moment, his mother lunged at him, slashing down with the energy blade. Talion only barely managed to dodge it, only barely managed to notice it at all. "Mom, what are you doing?" he shouted. "Well, it's simple, Talion. You're too much of a burden," Melody said. "All these years I've spent protecting you, and all you're doing is bringing me trouble. The demons that are after you, trying to kill me, and all I did was be your loving mother. And this is what I get for it. Nothing but pain and suffering. You know, the truth is, I hate you. I really should have just left you to die in the woods. It would have been much better for me. If it weren't for you, I'd probably be happy." "What?" Talion said, feeling confused and heartbroken, the words piercing in, tearing away at him. "If it weren't for you, Talion, I probably could have remarried by now, found myself a nice husband, had some real children of my own. You know, ones that I could love, ones that actually meant something to me, ones that didn't summon hordes of demons to try to kill me. All you are is a burden, Talion, a drain on my very existence. In fact, when I found you in the woods that day, I should have just killed you myself. Save the demon the trouble. It would have been much better for me. But I can remedy that now. You can. You can make it up to me, Talion. You do love me after all. After all the years of care that I've given you, why don't you just let me take you to them? The demons. If you let me give you to them, then I could be rewarded. Not only would they let me live, but they might pay me as well. Give me what I need to start a real family, to have real love from someone who isn't a monster. You want that, right, Talion? You can do that for me, can't you? After everything I've given you?" Talion felt hurt. heartbroken at his mother's words. In the moment, without realizing it, he had reached up and started to clasp at the necklace around him. And at that moment, he remembered what his mother said to him when she gave it to him. And suddenly, it became clear. "You're not her," Talion said, staring down at the ground. "You're not my mom. My mom would never say anything like that to me. She loves me. I don't know who or what you are, but you're not her." "Oh, Talion, why do you say these kinds of things?" "You're going to break your mother's dear heart," she said, beginning to crack a wicked smile, her form shifting and contorting, once again straying out, her hair beginning to float, grow long and dark, wisping into the air as if it were shadow, strands of it flowing from her head, her eyes growing twisted, beginning to glow a dull red color as her entire form began to shift, changing into a shadowy female figure, the color of the energy blade she wielded changing to a deep red. "Don't you love your mother anymore, you little brat?" Talion looked at this new terrifying entity standing before him with rage. How dare he impersonate my mother and say those terrible things? "Fear of betrayal," he heard announced from behind him, turning around to see his teacher there again, now leaning against one of the gently scorched trees. "As I said, there are many flavors to fear. Those that know anything about you will attempt to take advantage of those fears in any moment, at any time. You must learn not to be so trusting, Talion. If that had been an enemy, she could have just as she gave you that gentle hug, stuck a knife in your back. The line between real and fake, between reality and illusion, between truth and lies. When you deal with demons, that line is paper thin. There are demons who can peer into the depths of your consciousness and pull from it little fragments of your life, know things about you that they shouldn't know, understand you in a way that they have no right to. And there, they'll use what they find. They'll attempt to kill you with it, twist it against you, take your worst nightmares and make them reality. To use fear as a weapon is part of what being a demon is. It's part of the way that we fight. That was the fear of betrayal. To have one that you truly love turn their back on you, forsake you. But surprisingly, you dealt with it well. That usually tends to be the case when there is true trust and love between individuals. When surmounting the fear of betrayal, true love and trust is the most powerful weapon against it. When you truly believe and know in your heart and soul that someone could not be turned against you by their own will, then you can truly trust that any betrayal is simply a lie, and thus surmount the fear. But don't get comfortable just yet, Talion. As I said, his teacher announced as the fog began to billow again, flowing over his form, and he began to dissipate into it. Fear has many flavors, and you're nowhere near done with them.